Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 271. This program is dedicated in honor of the 50th birthday of Rabbi Shmuel Jacobson, a supporter of ours, a supporter of My Life Chassidus Applied, a big Baal Tzedakah in many different areas, and also a first cousin of mine. We share, our fathers were brothers. So may you have a 50th birthday, Shnas Hatzlacha, Mechael al-Choyel, Begashmis and Beruchnius, in all possible ways. 50th birthday, I always mention, of course, the story with the Rebbe. When the Rebbe turned 50, he said the Maimer in Tavshin Yud Beis, he said the Maimer on the Kapitel Nun Aleph, Adnai Sfosei Tiftach. When Rab Nissen Nemnov turned 50, the Rebbe gave over that he should chazer over that Maimer. So that Maimer has particular significance when it comes to this birthday. Of course, Chamishim La'etza, and all the interpretations of it. Okay, we're in the beginning of the 9 days, literally on Gimel Av. Today is Gimel Av, and we're going into, which is of course the birthday of Rabbi Shmuel. And we're going toward the saddest day of the year. And when Mashiach comes, then it'll be the most celebrated day of the year, Tisha B'Av. This coming Shabbos. Because it's Shabbos, it's Nidche, and the fast will be pushed off if Mashiach doesn't come till Sunday, which we'll talk about next week, Sunday. So we're in a very significant period that has many, many lessons to us, and especially, as Chassidus explains, to look at always the positive and find, even in the darkest moments, even in times of pain and times of sadness, to find the joy, to find the unity, to find the godliness within it all. And that, of course, is the message of this period in time. Now, of course, the 3 weeks began Shavuos B'Tam, as it intensifies the grieving in the morning in the 9 days, which began on Friday. As I mentioned last week, in 2 days will be also Hey Menachemov, which is the yahrzeit of the Arizal. A yahrzeit, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, is not a day of sadness alone, especially years later. It's a day when Peil Yeshua is B'Kerev Aretz, all the Aveda and all the work of that particular tzaddik on that day gathers together, elevates, and also Peil Yeshua, it affects salvations, B'Kerev Aretz, even the depths of this earth, even in the lowest levels. So it's interesting that this takes place right smack in the middle of the 9 days, Heyov, as the yahrzeit of Arna Kain, the Shchedesh, and we spoke about Magdim Refuah Makkah, that before the Makkah, before you have the illness, before you have the affliction, and in this case, the affliction of the 9 days, which is so much about pirud, separation. Firstly, the sinas chinam, the baseless hatred, which caused the destruction of the second temple. Secondly, the pirud that causes throughout the entire Seder Shtalshus, the entire cosmic order, where the divine presence, which was in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy Temple, separates on a revealed level. And Golus, by definition, is a displacement, a psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual displacement, all indicating to separations. Comes Aaron and the Arizal both focusing on the message of Achdus. To repair the breach, to repair the schism, what do? We add an increase in things of unity. So you find by the Arizal a fascinating thing. I've spoken about this in previous years. It just constantly always amazes me. Throughout history, you find there are many, many great leaders. Often those great leaders were leaders in their community, and sometimes they became known in the entire world. But it took time, because there were often different disagreements. Even the Rambam, for example, was controversial in his time. Some did not hold of everything he did. Till the Ramban, who came and wrote a snatzus and a defense, and that's when the Rambam was then virtually accepted by everybody. But you find throughout history, even great leaders, there were different opinions. Come to Arizal, though he came on the scene only a year, a little more than a year and a half, the last years of his life, the last year and 8 months of his life, came to Tzfas. He was embraced by all the great leaders of Tzfas, which was the greatest leaders of the Jewish community. We're talking about the Beis Yosef and the Ramak, Shlomo Alkovitz, talking about the Alshech. I mean, the list goes on. Chaim Vital, of the greats that all embraced him, and he was embraced everywhere. Even though there was one person who questioned, but then once he realized who that Arizal was, and they called him a Gon Eliki, a Ish Eliki, a divine human being, And usually it takes time for a person to emerge as that. Even according to the laws of Mammon, the Hilchas Mammon, the Rambam, how does someone get accepted? With time, as people recognize his greatness. Remember, this was also a time before technology. People study, and once he's endorsed and embraced by everybody. But here, Sfardim and Ashkenazim, and today Chassidim and non-Chassidim, of all walks of life, the Arizal, a unifying force, like the Rashbi was in his time. Why? Because the Arizal united both parts of Torah. Nigla the Torah, the body of Torah, and the spirit and the soul of Torah, Nishmos Daraisa. So when you're in that type of level where you're not looking at studying or teaching a certain part of Torah, you create unity and harmony. That harmony spills over also into harmony among people. So who better as a tzaddik, as a mukubal, and especially that Arizal who pioneered what would be called mitzvah legalizes hachachma, the time coming to reveal this chachma, this inner wisdom. Until then, it was not a mitzvah. It actually was considered to be something that has to be kept undercover, individuals and private, and it was very kept in very close circles. That began the process that the Baal Shem Tov, who would hear from Mashiach, would only accelerate with the spreading of the well springs to the outside, and then each generation after subsequent to that, even more so as a preparation to the Geula, and also to greater light to deal with the darkness, and it's Habbahataya, they're interconnected. So who better as a Rebbe, as a Tzaddik, as a Nasi Ador, Baal Primis HaTeira, a uniter in Teira, a uniter in so many levels, revealing the inner neshama of things, which of course is the key to unity. When we say the mitzvah, Haftarecha Kamecha, question is how? So the Baal Shem Tov teaches by looking at the soul of a person, as explained in Tanya chapter 32. So Arizal, who taught about the soul, and in a very dramatic and pioneering way, revolutionary way, you can even say, that elicited also revealing the soul in all of us, which creates a unity which counters and is an antidote and you could say a preventive medicine and an antidote to the pirud, to the separation and the disharmony and the fragmentation of this particular period in time. So that teaches us as well that we have to increase in these days in even deeper love, and you do that by going even deeper into the soul of a person. Because you could say, you know what, I just don't like certain people. How can it be a mitzvah regulate? You could say there's a mitzvah to do good to someone, charity, even if you don't like them. But to say a mitzvah to v'hafta, to love, how's there, the Maggid asked the question on loving God, how can you regulate an emotion? The answer is when you contemplate on the soul of an individual, you recognize the specialness that every human being has, every Jew has. And that, like he says in Tanya, Av echad l'kolonim, we're all children, we're all brothers and sisters with one father, and we all have a soul that's unique. And these souls connect. That's the Aveda, the work in this period in time. And that Arizal leads the way and guides us in that fashion. There are many other things that could be said about this, about Arizal. I remember in Tov Shalamed Hey, the Rebbe then made the siyum on the Masechtas, and he spoke about Pole Adam Avad Avedase Pole Bechol Yem V'Yem, and he spoke then about Adei Orav, Pole Yem Adei Orav. A person works Adei Orav, and the Rebbe gave all the different interpretations in Tov Shalamed Hey, and then he added that Arizal's interpretation Adei Orav, and then gave the interpretation the Rebbe Adei Orav includes till the end of Golus, Orav going on the darkness of Golus, and explain that all the interpretations come together and unite. I spoke about this in previous episodes, which I'm going to cross-reference right now. Episode 76, 126, 172, and 221. Now this leads us also from Heyov, we go into, of course, the days that we get closer to Tisha B'Av, and this year Tisha B'Av is also Shabbos Chazain. So usually Shabbos Chazain is the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. But this year it's on Tisha B'Av, and the fast, as I mentioned, is pushed off till Sunday. What's Shabbos Chazain? Chazain Yeshayo, the vision of Yeshaya, where he talks about the destruction. But then concludes, Siyam B'Mishpat Tipah, the remedy as well, that Zion will be redeemed through Mishpat, through his Torah, Halach, and Mishnah, and Shaveh, its captives through Tzedakah, through charity, which are also uniting forces. Torah unites and Tzedakah unites. So Shabbos Chazain, we know the famous Pirush, every year the Rebbe would cite it the name from the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditzer that Rabbi Hillel Paritcher cites, that Chazain is also refers to, in addition to the vision of Yeshaya, the vision that's shown to each individual. From afar is shown the Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, the third temple, in order to evoke the gaguim, the yearning, to want to rebuild it by doing what we have to do to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, the unity, the mitzvos, and so on. And he gives a mashal for it, a mashal of a father who, in love of his son, chose to weave for him a beautiful shirt. And the child wore the shirt a few times, and then he accidentally made a mistake, and the shirt got torn. So then Hashem, God, the father went, and the king went, and wove a second shirt, even better and more beautiful than the first one. And again, the same thing happened. So this time, God, the father, the king says, I won't give him the shirt. I'll weave even a more beautiful one, and I'll show it to him once a year from a distance. So he should want to appreciate it. And then when Mashiach comes, the Gula Amitis Vashlema, the Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, then I'll give it to him, and it'll be an eternal Migdash Adnei Ken Yedecha, a Bayis Nitzche, an eternal, and the shirt will never again be torn or compromised in any way. And that's the example he gives us. As the Rebbe, seemingly it would be a better example to give from a building. Since the Beis Hamikdash, this moshel example and analogy for the temple, why a shirt? It should have been. He built a beautiful palace for his son, and he messed it up. He let it get destroyed. Then he built even a better one. That Bayis Sheni is even Yaakov is even greater than Bayis Gadol. Here Bayis Ha'achrim and Bayis Hadishin, both in years and in size and so on. It stood longer, 420 years, not just 410 years. It would seem more appropriate to give the example of a building, and then show the Beis Hamikdash every year. Why a garment? And the Rebbe explains in Chassidus, talks about makifim, that there's two types of makifim. There's a makif hakorev and makif harochik. Makif hakorev means a makif that's closer to us, like a garment. A garment, even though it is a makif, it's not who you are. It's a garment you put on, but it's a garment that's tailored to the body of the person. So it's a makif hakorev, it's called. A transcendent state, but a transcendent state that's commensurate and relates to the structure, the human being in this case. Makif harochik is compared to a bias. A bias is not as close. It's also a makif. You live inside the home, but from a home you can't always tell who's living in there. From a garment you can tell the size of the person. A healthy garment fits tailored to him. So makif harochik is a transcendence that's even more distant. The reason that Levi Yitzchak gives the mashal of a garment because he wants to explain how the Beis Hamikdash relates to us, not as a distant structure, but like a garment that relates to us, and we can see it and shown on Shabbos Chazon. This is one of the explanations that Rebbe gives, why the mashal is used, this example is used, which of course tells us that that we're seen shown on Shabbos Chazon, even though we don't see it physically, and the Rebbe explains this in many different ways, but its effects we can see if we allow ourselves. The effect is how it wakes up our gaguim, our yearning, to want to rebuild it. But it's something that we see like something that relates to us, not just a building, but actually like a garment that we can dresses us up. That God rests among us as a garment is closer to our beings than a structure is. And that tells us that this period in time, though on one end, as I said, is the saddest time of the calendar, saddest period in time, it also has within it tremendous potential, tremendous potency, that when you allow ourselves, we can elicit even a deeper type of connection, a deeper unity, and a deeper connection also to the Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, which is a direct product, outgrowth of our activities, our actions. So we can visualize it, and we can relate it and say, Chazain, the Chazain was shown this, and we learn to derive, we learn to allow it to motivate us to grow. That is what this period in time is about. So there are times in the year where we get giluyim, there's revelations that inspire us. Regular holidays. No holidays regular, but each one in its own way. Then there's times in the year it's through the distance, through the fact that we're shown something and we don't have it. And you feel that angst, you feel that lack. That void, that vacuum is what elicits even a more intense wish and will and desire to connect. And that's a lesson to all of us in life, that when there's a setback or there's any type of situation that we would call challenging, that is like a 9 days in our personal lives, it has the capacity to demoralize us. But what it should do is elicit from us and motivate us to dig deeper and find even greater resources and strengths and skills to be able to bring even more light into our lives. So that's some lessons from this. And as I referred already to previous episodes, so here's a good opportunity. My Life Chassidus Applied is a service that Meaningful Life offers. You go to chassidusapplied.com, and the full array of all the programs, really 270 episodes, the last 6 years, are all there. They're indexed. You can look for them by topic or by episode. They're also timestamped, so you can find exactly the place in the YouTube version on the desktop or laptop, and go exactly to the place that's linked straight to the place that you'd like to check out. And we've covered literally thousands of topics by now. And these are all questions that are generated by you on our anonymous forum, where you can submit any question completely anonymously because there's no trace. It's a forum. If you'd like us to respond for some reason, you'd like us to send you something, you have to give your email address there so we know how to communicate with you. Because sometimes people write us and say, please respond, and we can't respond, we have no idea who you are, which is exactly the way it's meant to be. It also has many other resources of applying Chassidus to our lives, including the different essays, powerful essays, literally now thousands of people who've submitted essays over the last 5 years. In the different essay contests are all posted there, and we post them every week, the new essays of this past year's contest, this 2019 contest. Okay, good. Let us now move to some other topics and some follow-ups. So the next question is there life on other planets according to Torah? Okay, so I did address this 2 weeks ago when we spoke about the landing on the moon and the Rebbe's Sikha. So this Rebbe actually asked, so let me read the question and then the Rebbe's response. According to Chassidus, can there be reproductive light outside of planet Earth? And can there be beings with free will other than humankind? And the answer is yes. There's a Sikha Dvarim, Shabbos Parsha Dvarim, this Shabbos 50 years ago, Tafshin Chav Tes, 1969, that summer, where the Rebbe spoke about it in connection to the events then of landing on the moon for the first time. And basically what the Rebbe said then regarding this topic, because it was with landing on the moon, of course, brought up again this question, is there life on other planets? And the Rebbe basically cited that from a posuk in Sheftim, in Shiras Dveira, in Kapitel Hey, so this was after the war with Baruch winning the war against Sisera, his enemy. So in chapter 5, verse 20, Dveira, the Neviah, the prophetess, sings, the stars in their course fought against Sisera. And then in verse 23, she continues, Aru meroiz ve'aru teishveha. In English, curse meroiz, said the angel of the Lord, curse bitterly its inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of God against the mighty men. So what's meroiz? That's the question. So there are two opinions in the Talmud in Moed Katan 16a. And Rashi cites it, I believe, on the Posuk as well. One opinion is that it's referring to a certain place in the world that the people live there, and that's what it's referring to, a city. And the inhabitants of the city that did not come help. But a second opinion, which is a much more definitive one, because since we're talking about the stars in their course fought against Sisera, the Kechavim, that Meroiz is a Kechav, is a planet. A celestial body whose inhabitants did not come to help Baruch. So based on this, Yishva, its inhabitants of another planet. Now the interesting thing is, the first opinion does not say there is no life on other planets. It just says in this context, you could touch Meroiz is a city in this world. So conceptually, even both opinions, even the first opinion does not negate the possibility. The second opinion clearly states that it means life on another planet. That's very clear. And as I said, it fits into the Amoray's, sounds awfully similar to Mars. Not necessarily that's its meaning. I'm just pointing that out as an aside. The Rebbe went on to explain, however, that you have to say, because of theological reasons, that since Torah was given to this world, because if there's creation of life with free will, then you have to also give them directions what to do. And since Torah was given a Sinai, only one Torah was given to this world, you have to say if there is life, that life on other planets, like it is with the Orum Morais, like in Morais, that it's not a life of free will, it's not a life as we know it. Reproductive, why not? It doesn't say anywhere you can't have reproductive life. But here you clearly see that's possible according to everybody, and according to one opinion, actually is life on other planets. Okay. Fine. Now, everything has to do with Chassidus applied. Why is it irrelevant to us that there's life on other planets? And first of all, it adds into the amazement of Magadlo Masecha, God's creation, that He created such a vast solar system, including life. It also teaches us the value of our lives, because at the end of the day, everything was created in order for us to elevate the world with our free will, and through Torah to transform the world into Adira B'Tachtenim. So any life out there, just like there's tremendous amount of life on this planet, and that also teaches us the value of our lives, because we have the ability to elevate all of that and to refine it all and to direct it towards its purpose. Okay. Let us now go to the next question. Does Cholov Yisroel affect our emunah? I understand that mitzvos have underlying reasons and higher purposes. For example, I've heard that the Rebbe says that keeping Cholov Yisroel has a great effect on our emunah Hashem, faith in God. What is the source in the Torah for this, and what is the logical connection between eating Cholov Yisroel and having emunah? So firstly, I spoke about this more at length at episodes 108, 110, and 112. So there's the halachas, there's the Mishnah, and then there's the halachas of Shulchan Aruch about Cholov Akum, meaning cholov that is not watched by a Jew, how it was milked and how it's taken care of and prepared, because of the chash, the concern that it might mix in other milk from other animals that are not kosher. And that is the technical reason. But everything has a deeper reason. And let's say there is milk mixed in. Why does that bother us? So this goes back to the laws of kosher itself. Why do we eat kosher? So you could say it's a chukah. That's what God said. These foods are permitted, these foods are not permitted. But we know that in addition to the fact that that's what God wants, everything has a reason, and that's why you find in the commentaries. In Parsha Shmini, you find in the different commentaries, the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachai and the Alshich, I believe, they all talk about the fact that animals that don't have the signs of a kosher animal are more predatory animals. Animals that chew their cud and have split hooves are generally domestic animals. And since you are what you eat, you assume what you consume, the effect of eating a certain animal has an effect on us. Even in general, even kosher food has an effect on us, affect our personality, on our moods, heavier foods, and so on. So therefore, as the Zohar says, that there are more sensitive souls in the world, like the heart, they have to be more careful of what you consume. So the regular world, the regular world, not the Jewish world, the non-Jewish world, that foods are not poisonous. They're not destructive in that sense. And because their spirituality, they're able to eat those foods. But for a Jewish person, compared the Jew to the heart, there you have to be more sensitive because the heart's more sensitive, so what food it consumes. So Cholov Akum would go into the same category. We're now getting into whether it needs hashgacha today, according to Rav Moshe, and so on and so forth. Bottom line is, the Aruch HaShulchan and many others have said that we're not looking for any loopholes here. There could be a loophole. We have a certain heter, but generally speaking, Cholov Akum the issue is not whether it's watched, is that there's something about a certain food being cared about that makes sure that it's most refined and therefore fitting spiritually for the person to consume. So therefore, based on all the sources that talk about what non-kosher food does, And in this case, Cholov Vacuum would be the possibility of something not kosher from another animal being mixed into the milk. So it has an effect on our personality, including the effect of an emunah. Now, in Sforim, it speaks about it mostly in the Sifrei Kabbalah. I didn't actually bring up a source. I'll look it up. I didn't look it up, an actual source, but more in Kabbalah, it talks about, and Chassidus, of course, talks about how foods have an effect on us, including Cholov Vacuum has an effect in a negative way, because, as I said, when you're talking about what you consume, which becomes our flesh and our blood, you want to be most sensitive. So just like the example would be that you want to eat healthier foods, the same thing spiritually. There's some foods that are more conducive to adding and increasing a person's faith and a person's connection to the divine, and certain foods that create more disconnection and therefore can affect a person's faith. That's why you have stories. The Alter Rebbe, even there's a story where somebody came to him that they had a son, that a child that was dealing with was having doubts in faith, having questions about faith. So the Alter Rebbe said that he probably ate something from Cholov Vacuum, because that affects the faith. That's a source of a fetish from a story. Is there a source further beyond that in the books, whether it's Kisvei Arizal or other Kabbalah? That I have to look up. If anybody has any sources, please share them with me, and I'll share them on this program. Okay, next question. And again, I refer you to those episodes where I discuss this more at length. The next question is it appropriate to paint a mural of the Alter Rebbe on an alley wall? So I discussed this topic back in episodes 186, 188, and 193. But since the question came in again, let me read the question and then briefly respond, but I tell you where I spoke about it at length there. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. About a year ago, I wrote to you about a number of graffiti paintings of the Rebbe drawn on alley walls in Crown Heights, which was then spray painted over by zealots. In that letter, I expressed my feelings that it's inappropriate to paint the image of the Rebbe on alley walls. You seem to agree with me. Unfortunately, history repeated itself a few weeks ago when another, I think, graffiti artist painted the image of the Alter Rebbe on an alley wall on Kingston Avenue in Crown Heights. To say it's distasteful, I think, is an understatement. Rab Simon, you may wonder who I am to defend the honor of the Alter Rebbe. The truth is, I asked myself the same question. My reply is every Chabad Chassid has the responsibility and obligation to defend the honor of the Alter Rebbe and all the Rabbeim. I'm not going to blame the artist because I'm assuming he's not Lubavitch and he had good intentions. However, the artist did not draw this in the middle of the night. It was by day, and I'm sure he got permission from the nearby store owner or property owner to paint on the building. A Lubavitcher Chassid should know better and understand that this is not an appropriate place to paint the image of a Rebbe, especially when, in my opinion, the style of the drawing is not too honorable either. I would like to say to the artist, if he would be listening to your show, that he's obviously a gifted artist. However, it has to be utilized in the right way. For example, such art can be used to spread the 7 laws of Noach, the 10 mitzvah campaigns. But drawings of the Rebbe on alley walls is totally inappropriate in my opinion. Gewalt vei geschregen. Where are the Rabbonim? Vadakol anash. Of course, this should be resolved b'darkei neim or b'darkei shalom in a peaceful and calm and a peaceful way. Mesayim and B'tev, we conclude with good, as today is referring to the date when the letter was written. It was a while ago. I would like to conclude with a blessing that all of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael and the world over should be blessed only with revealed good, materially and spiritually. Mashiach now. Amen. Okay, so I did speak about it on the different sides of the story. I didn't come up with a definitive response, even though I do agree leaning toward against it, because knowing from how the Rebbe said not to make caricatures, not to make cartoons and comic books of the Rabbeim, everything should be the original pictures as we have them. Also was against making a Rebbe on a stamp, because it could be discarded and it could be defaced. So I would tend to agree that, especially since I'm not 100% sure, why not? Why take the risk and just not do it? So I would agree with that. To go and deface it and spray paint it is I don't know if that's a vandalism, is also not a solution. So I'm not going to say anything more on it because I did speak about it in 186, 188, and 193. But I appreciate you bringing it up again, and may join the fray, and may everybody weigh in on this matter. As I said, I don't have a black and white source, but based on things I've seen and what I've heard, Someone asked me, I would say, what's the need to do it for? No mitzvah to do it, so then stay away from something of this nature. That is it isur daraisa? I didn't say it's a prohibition, but there's a matter of respect and necessarily appropriate. Now, some may argue, in a way of publicizing. So firstly, this is being done in Crown Heights. We're not talking about publicizing it, putting up a picture of the Alter Rebbe somewhere which would awaken people to tshuva, to Yiddishkeit. And even then, maybe a picture is better than a piece of art. But the idea is, as we do have art of the Rabbeim, so the question is where you post it. In most cases, art is placed on a wall, in a museum, in a house, in a shul, in a Chabad house. There, the question is more on an alley wall, in the street, which at the end of the day, also the weather will affect it. So as I said, I would lean against it, but I'm not going to rule on this on black and white, because I don't know if anyone can make such a ruling. So enough said on the topic. If anybody wants to weigh in, please share, and we'd love to hear your comments, and I'll address it. Okay, next question. Next question is, how can we explain the many wives of Yaakov, Shlomo, and others? Yeah. This is a follow-up to episode 267 on polygamy. I listened to your answer with great interest and appreciated it in that episode. However, I still have so many questions. Since I was a young teenager, I struggled deeply with understanding how we say Elikei Yaakov when he had 4 wives. I can get Rachel and Leah, but Bilhah and Zilpah as concubines? Quite honestly, the thought makes me nauseous. As Jewish history goes on, we meet David HaMelech. He had so many wives, and then when he was older, had a psula to warm him up. Then we move on to Shlomo, 3,000. If we would hear of a modern-day figure having 3,000 women, we would call him all sorts of names, and this is who Hashem chose to build the Beis HaMikdash. As a teenager, I asked every rabbi and rebbitzin I met to help me understand this. While yes, there can be individual answers to each situation, the sheer numbers and the fact that these are such major figures in Jewish history was still something I couldn't fathom. I eventually decided to try and put the concept to rest and accept that I understand so much Torah and so much about what we do in Yiddishkeit that it's okay not to understand it all. Fast forward some time, I am now, Baruch Hashem, married, a shlucha and a mother. These questions have now come up in my life as I teach these stories to my students. Chazer Chumash with my son and watch my daughter say Tehillim. I've searched for an answer, yet can't seem to find any. I wonder what I will say to my children when they ask me. With all the recent scandals going on in the world, these topics are currently a hot button issue. Someone in my community asked me what the difference was between Jeffrey Epstein, Trump, Clinton, and all the other men who used their power to abuse and manipulate women, and the men in Jewish history. I gave the same wishy-washy answers I heard my whole life, but I don't feel answered myself. I would truly love your input. Okay. So, as you know, I don't shy away from any questions. And though this question is not a simple one, I will say the following. I think it's important, instead of trying to find cute or I don't say the word cute, but trying to find an answer for each particular episode, and sometimes forced answers, halachic loopholes, and so on and so forth, I think it's important to take a different approach completely. What is Torah, and who are all these individuals? Why do we give them such sacred roles and divine mission that they all were on? And then when you find these things, of course, it's quite questionable. And we ask these questions. So the truth is, when you go through Torah in general, not just these episodes, you'll find full of controversial stories. Cain kills Hevel, the whole story of Chet Tzadas, things that happen through their alienation, then by the Mabel, and then things that happen afterwards. I mean, there's barely a story. I don't know if there's one peaceful, calm story that just has, from beginning to end, peaceful beginning and end. You have Yosef's brother selling him into slavery and almost killing him. You have the story with Yehuda and Tamar. You have Lot and his daughters. Not mentioning Yaakov and Esav, Yitzchak and Yishmael. The list goes on and on and on. So yes, in each case you can come and give an explanation why, what happened, and how to explain it. But I'll speak from the perspective that I came to learn to be at peace with this. It was not just that, like you're saying, some things you don't understand. We have to really go the other way around. What is Torah and who are these individuals? So there's an expression that the Rameh and the Shalah and others bring. The Rebbe cites it in a number of places. What is Torah? Torah is the blueprint for creation. Torah is Chachmaseh v'Ritzonah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God invested, God committed into words His will and His wisdom. That in turn takes on a narrative story, which is the story of the Torah, but first and foremost, it is a divine story. In the words of the Rameh and Shalah, is like this: Torah medaberes be'elyonim u'meramezes betachtenim. The Torah speaks about things above. It's a spiritual book. It's a book of God's blueprint and plan. And it hints to things below. So you say, what do you mean it hints to? Isn't this Torah all narrative below? Adam and Chava and Adam and Eve in the garden, and then the rest of the generations, it's all in narrative form. So Dibra Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam, the Torah speaks in the language of man. It is a metaphor. It actually happened. These people did live, and they went through the story exactly. We're not saying that it's a metaphor, that it didn't happen, God forbid. It all happened. But this real story is the story behind the story. First it happened on a spiritual level, and then it evolved on a physical level. So when the Jews were in Egypt, was because in Ruchnis and Sheresh Advarim you have a spiritual Egypt, which is Mitzarim Ugvulim. Lavan, for example, Lavan Arami, who was a Rasha, Yaakov's father-in-law. So Lavan Chassidus cites from Kabbalah is rooted in Levin Elyon, in the supernal whiteness. Levin Elyon, supernal whiteness of Atik. And that's where Yaakov dealt with the sheep and all the explanations. So it says, Zelu u'mazeh asa lekim. Everything in this world has a spiritual root. So you see even a Lavan. And the same thing with an Esav. And the same thing, Yaakov Esav Amurim B'Parsha. The same thing with even the Bilam and Balak. Even those that we would call wicked people, all have a spiritual root in a spiritual story. There may reflect some type of negative energy. In Lavan's case, it actually reflects very powerful energy. Pare, we have Pare. Of course, Pare was a Tan HaGadol. He's considered to be the great serpent. The Aviv is the head of the klipa, ultimate negative energy, and yet it says in Zayar, Pare also refers to that from him bursts out all the energies. Achashverosh, of course, was a king in Persia. Achashverosh was a Rasha, or a Tipish, however the Gemara explains it. And yet we say Achashverosh is also Me'era Erech Sidis sites, and the Rebbe brings Achris V'Reishes Shaloi, Melech Sha'achris V'Reishes Shaloi. How do you reconcile the two? Because when it comes down in this physical world, it takes on one shape, but in its root, it all has spiritual sources, and some of them are very high spiritual levels. So when you think of it that way, that the Torah begins on the spiritual level, the Torah precedes existence. Then all the stories that you hear about, whether it's with Yaakov and his 4 wives, or Shlomo, or David, and so on, all happen first and foremost on those spiritual levels. That's where you can understand it, because each thing has a spiritual role. If we were talking about just regular people, and they came around, they happened to be great people, great leaders, and then here you have only 3,000 wives and 4 wives and so on. You have all the questions, and you have to bend over backwards to find all kinds of explanations. And you could find. Yaakov before Matan Torah, there was no problem having more than 1 wife. What I discussed, polygamy. Shlomo Melech is after Matan Torah, it was taka frowned upon, and because of that, it caused a big problem. It caused the split of the Shlomo Melech's kingdom. But how does that tzaddik, Shlomo Melech, we talk about him as building the Beis HaMikdash, he represents such high spiritual levels? The only way is to explain it on the spiritual level. And then it manifests itself on a physical level, sometimes for good, and sometimes has negative elements. With Yaakov, it's considered to be a very spiritual high level. With Shlomo, actually, on a physical level, is not considered a positive. Same thing with David HaMelech. And yet the Gemara says anyone who says David sinned is making a mistake. But he did things that seemingly were that way. That's why you have to, the only way to really ultimately understand it is understand it on that spiritual level. Because there the things make sense and everything has its purpose. And what would be the purpose? Yaakov needed to create the 12 tribes. They needed different attributes. And that had to come from 4 different mothers. As we discussed back in episode 267. Shlomo HaMelech, you have to find the explanation. What his intentions were, what the spiritual intentions were, whether it was to create sparks that would be spread all over the world through the different women that he was with, the different wives. And on a physical level, as I said, it could evolve to being actually something that was not appropriate. So we are not afraid of saying that, because the Torah itself says, for example, David HaMelech was not allowed to build a Beis HaMikdash because Dam Rav Shefachta, he spilled a lot of blood. But David is David HaMelech. But yet blood and Beis HaMikdash don't go hand in hand. Was there a spiritual reason for it? Yes. Was it preparing the ground? Yes. Can you explain it? Yes. But at the end of the day, the true explanation where these things make sense is only on the spiritual level. And once you know that, you can find a good explanation for any one of these stories, because each one on the spiritual level, this is how it had to be. It wasn't just some desire that he wanted to have 3,000 wives, or some desire that he wanted 4. It did not come down to human frailties and human flaws. There's always a deeper spiritual meaning behind it all. It's interesting, I never saw this anywhere, but the 3,000 wives, we also talk about 3,000 metaphors that Shlomo HaMelech gave to explain every given idea. Maybe that has a connection to it. Because remember, L'mayla Ruchnius, Ish v'Isha, so the Ish and Isha is like two dimensions of one reality. And at some point, an Isha is the woman, the feminine energy manifests the energy, the seed that the male infuses her with. So it could be that 3,000 women were, for him, a type of 3,000 different ways of expressing the divine. I mean, as I said, once you go on the spiritual level, you can find explanations. The point I wanted to make was really addressing it, not specific this story, that story, but just a different attitude. At the end of the day, I don't find another way to really, l'chatchila, to explain Torah, or else you're going to be constantly apologetic and constantly on the defensive and constantly trying to maneuver to explain things or avoid things and so on. Whereas if you understand it this way, it all begins on a spiritual level. It evolves on a physical level. On the physical level, sometimes it's not exactly the way it was meant to be. It's not always correct, appropriate. Or the explanations that are given that gave the different heta that was allowed in different situations. That is the general explanation on this topic. Next question. Hi. I grew up in a frum Chabad family and went to a regular Lubavitcher school. I'm 23. I want to get married, but I'm not religious. I'm not frum. I feel absolutely nothing for Yiddishkeit. I don't keep Shabbos and don't keep kosher. I'm not looking to marry someone frum. I feel nothing for Yiddishkeit. I wish I did. I'm miserable and unhappy. Most of my friends are married, starting families, running Chabad houses, and all that. I wish I felt anything for Yiddishkeit, let alone a passion for it. I feel nothing. I feel dead inside. Do you have any advice for me? Okay. Well, unfortunately, I've heard this more than once, but each story is another story, and I don't know the details, so it's hard for me to speak to you personally about your specific life story, but I will say this. We all have our life trajectory, our life journey that begins when we're children, and the things we go through that cause us to grow up in different ways. Some people grow up in very beautiful homes, some grow up in very painful homes, dysfunctional homes. I'm not sure what kind of home you grew up in, but I will say this. The fact that you feel miserable, the fact that you feel unhappy, to me is a cry of your soul, and you're writing it to me, it's a cry of your soul looking for something. This isn't about trying to convince you to be frum and eat kosher and keep Shabbos and so on. That to me are the symptoms. The key is to find someone you can speak to and really open up spiritually, soulfully. Because at the end of the day, the mitzvos and the Torah mitzvos and the Yiddishkeit we grow up with are the tools, are the methods, are the ways that God, the instruments God gave us to live the best possible life. But frankly, many of us are taught it in a very negative way, in a very dogmatic way, and sometimes even a very abusive way. So it makes total sense that some people reject it because something presented to you, even if it's a beautiful Shabbos, but it's presented to you in an abusive way, you don't want the abuse, so you throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I would say the first thing, and most of all, is to find someone that you can talk to, heart to heart, soul to soul. Not talking about what to embrace, not to embrace, because what you're describing is you want to have a life. You want to have a happy life, however form it takes. So without any agendas, without trying to preach to you or trying to convert you or trying to in any way influence you, I think you just need someone you can trust and open up to and just talk about your life and see what you can do to start experiencing something healthy. And yes, a healthy relationship. I have no doubt when you bring health into your life, Torah and mitzvos will be easier to embrace, because if they're coming from a healthy place, you suddenly realize that Torah and mitzvos that may have been presented in an unhealthy, dysfunctional way actually has a lot of beauty to it. And that's the challenge. So I look at this as a personal, a human issue. Find someone you can speak to human, not someone who's going to try to convert you, or someone's going to try to influence you or try to be mashpia on you. Someone you can just speak to openly, talk about your life, talk about your things that are working for you, things that are not working for you, and try to start creating a regimen of a healthier life where you can feel happy day by day, and the rest will follow from there. So that's what my advice is for you, is to find someone like that. That, to me, is the key to the entire thing, and everything else will follow from there. Okay, if you want to follow up, so please write to us. But remember, it's all anonymous. So if you want us to be able to contact you and want to respond to you, please give us some contact information. And I'd be happy to speak to you. It could be confidential, or you don't have to tell me your name, and perhaps pursue this a bit further. Okay, next question. AA and the 12 steps. Is it legitimate according to Torah and Chassidus? Rabbi Jacobson Shlita, I hope this finds you well. I've heard that one of the rabbis recently wrote an article against addicts going to 12-step meetings. Here's the link. I personally know addicts that have read his article and have questioned their going to meetings. From what I know about addicts, not going to meetings can often lead to relapse and serious pekuach nefesh issues. That's like life and death issues. The rabbi references several articles. What is your opinion? Thank you. Another person writes, I am an avid follower and going to 12-step programs, which has saved my life and my supervisor and my friends to really stay away from things that I was addicted to. I've heard some questioning whether this is something for a Jewish person, and I'd like to know what your thoughts on this are. Because if I was told not to do that, it actually would have a deep impact on my life, and not in a positive way. Okay, so firstly, let me refer you to episodes 105 through 107, where I spoke about this more at length. There it was about whether it's compatible 12 steps with the Torah. Now, as always, I am not here to speak as a Rav, a Pesach, to rule on this matter. If you have a rabbi, a Rav that you trust, and the Rav has questioned it, so you can ask the Rav respectfully, what should you do, since it's not suggesting going to 12-step, what are the alternatives? And I believe in these articles there are alternatives. I'm not here to rule on the matter, but I will say there are Rabbanim that are big advocates of the 12 steps because they've seen it work. Rabbi Twersky, famous Rabbi Mordechai Twersky, can be consulted on this matter, and he talks about it a lot. There are even those that have written books and shown how the 12 steps are associated with Yiddishkeit. Yeah, now it's true the 12 steps themselves were founded not necessarily by Jewish and not from Jewish sources. It could even be from dubious sources. The question is there a healthy form of the 12 steps that has nothing to do with anything that is antithetical to Torah? Like the Rebbe spoke about meditation, creating a meditation TM that is a kosher form of it. Not lechatchila, we're not talking about someone who's a healthy person, we're talking about someone who is in need of this. And yes, I do myself know many, many people who the AA and 12 steps have helped and continue to help, and they'll swear by it, including Shem Torah mitzvos, who have asked Rabbanim and so on. Since I'm not ruling on the matter, I don't want to rule on the factor, so I would say the following. 12 steps and the AA have proven methods that have worked. They do not need to have things that are unkosher or things that are not Jewish or things that are Christianized or things that come from other places. There are elements in it that are very, very consistent with the idea of accountability, the idea of a higher power of God, and so on. So whether you call it 12 steps or AA is not really relevant. The question is the method works. And since it works, with the supervision and guidance of a Rav and a Mashpia and professionals, I would go case by case and ask the people you trust, your rabbi and your Rav and your Mashpia and your therapist, what is the best way to deal with different addictions you're dealing with. So I look at it like case by case, Instead of some blanket statement, yes, go to 12 steps, not go to 12 steps. Look at it case by case. Ask people you trust. Ask a Torah person. You can ask more than one Torah person. And get a well-sanctioned approach to life. Like anything, we always want to do it according to Torah, according to Chassidus. And I see no reason. There are many today people who are trained both in halacha and Chassidus and hashkafa and have a good psychology, who have a good understanding what works and what doesn't work, what's kosher, what's not kosher, and so on and so forth. That's my response to this, in addition to what I spoke about in those episodes. Okay, next question. Sad topic, suicide. Is bad or not? Why is it so bad to commit suicide? I spoke about this in episode 13. Now, I just want to point out, when I say I spoke about these things, does not mean that the question is less valid. It's just that since we have a large body of material in My Life Chassidus applied, cross-referencing is a way of not having to be redundant. You can always refer to it. It's all accessible. So I spoke about it more in detail there with a very interesting letter from the Rebbe. The brief answer, Hama'abed Asmei L'das, why it's forbidden, is because the same reason that the Meraglim sinned when they came to the conclusion we cannot go into Israel because it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. God gave us life and gave us the strength to deal with life. When we throw in the towel and say, I have to end my life, God forbid, you're basically challenging God himself, who gave you life as a blessing, gave you the strength to deal with every given challenge. Now, I'm not here to judge someone who has suicidal thoughts or goes through that. God bless them and should have the power to deal with their challenges. I can't put myself in their shoes. Someone comes to such desperate place. But if you're asking me the theological and the hashkaf and the philosophical and the Torah-based halachic basis, is because we are not here to make such a decision. We were given life, figure out how to live, not whether to live. That's a gift from God, and whether we see it as a gift or not, that is what we have to do, is look for that gift and help and find people that can help us get through the difficult times. Now, this is not a statement of judgment. This is not a statement of criticism. It's just as the question, so I'm answering the question. Just like we say, why you're not allowed to mutilate yourself? You're not hurting anyone else. You're mutilating your own body. Because it's in the Chosav Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Alter Rebbe brings it, the Rambam brings it, the Radbaz explains, because the human body is not yours. It's a gift given by God, and someone gave you a gift. Protect it, preserve it. You don't go and alter it. You don't tattoo it. You don't scar it. You don't wound it. And you definitely don't mutilate it. So take that in a broader sense. Life itself is that way. It's not our life to play around with. So you're tampering with the God, only God gives life, and that's why it's such something that we have to stay away from because of that reason. Now, if someone is in a point where they have such suicidal thoughts, I don't think we have to yell at them and say, who are you to go against God? You have to find the kind words, compassionate words, loving words, to show somebody the value that they have, show them their value, show them how important they are to you and to others, and show them that love that will give them the will to want to go on. So let's separate the theological and the philosophical from the practical and compassionate approach. Compassionate approach is showing them you were given a life, you have beautiful things to contribute. Why would you want to deprive others from the gifts that you have to give and from your calling to what Hashem, God, wants of you? So that's already an approach which I spoke about more in those previous episodes that I referred to. So I wanted to emphasize that it has to be presented in a sensitive way. But since the question was the theological, what is so bad, that's the answer, because it's not our life to play with. This is God's life, and we have to protect it, and we have to preserve it. Okay. Now, remember we've been speaking about vaccinations. So I covered, I believe, everything I was able to find from the Rebbe, answers and letters and different approaches. But there's still questions that came in that I didn't answer, and some more questions, and more questions keep coming in. I'm going to read a selection of them, not all of them, because some of them are definitely, like agenda-based, crazy, ranting and raving about that vaccination is killing everybody. As I said, the basic summation, what I said is we have a Torah for these things, like for everything. And the Torah says to speak to doctors, so between rabbis and Torah people, and Chassidic and doctors, and you can go to more than one, there's an approach to take, and that's what the Rebbe is basing it on. So we shouldn't take medicine in our own hands one way or the other. Everything has to be done with moderation, with consideration, and we do it a Torah way. It's not about each of us coming and becoming a crusader for or against vaccination. That's not the point. It's what does God want? Like I just said about life and about mutilation. What does God want us to do? Not what you want, what I want. And there's statistics, medicine, even regular medicine. Forget about vaccinations. People go into surgery. Yes, unfortunately, we know surgery sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes there are complications. So someone's going to come out and say, no more surgery. We're not going to do any medical interventions because we have some statistics that a few people have died. That's part of life. You have to look at the whole picture, and we have a Torah for this, and the Torah Bavaran did all anticipated and told us how to go address it with doctors. So vaccination is part of that picture, and the Rebbe makes that clear. Al tifresh min hatzibur. It's part of halacha. We're talking about vaccinations that are proven and so on. So I'm just summing up what I said, but I'll read a few questions. Let me see how many more there are there. Yeah, okay. I don't know if I can read them all, but I'll read at least a few, maybe reserve more for next time. So this is in addition to what we've read already. From the fact someone writes that the Rebbe encouraged people to have their children vaccinated against polio, is it correct to infer that the Rebbe would be pro all vaccines? Rabbi Jacobson Shiyach. There are now something like 16 different vaccines for children in the USA, of which a total of about 70 doses are recommended to be given to each child. There are many potential harmful ingredients in vaccines, albeit in minute amounts, but the effects can be accumulative, so that when multiplied by 70 or so, can well cause damage to more sensitive children. The National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has paid out over $4 billion to families of such children, even though they reject the majority of claims, and it is stood that most cases are never reported and the families don't even try to make claims. The money paid out comes from a tax on all vaccinations sold. Evidently, the CDC knows of the dangers of vaccination, but they feel that it's worth sacrificing a few children for the sake of the many. Most children seem to be fine with vaccinations, but it is a fact that children today are not as healthy as they were in the USA. 50% of children suffer from chronic disease, which is higher than other developed countries which give less vaccinations. There are probably other factors involved, but it seems that vaccination is not so innocent as we would like to think. Concerning the fact that vaccinations have eliminated terrible diseases, it has been shown that a basic understanding of hygiene together with clean drinking water and modern sanitation has already greatly reduced disease incidence before the introduction of the vaccinations. Nowadays, vaccination is a huge money-making business, and parents are being advised to vaccinate against, for example, chickenpox, not on the grounds that it could be dangerous, but that the parents would have to miss days from work should their child catch it. The Rebbe's letters, which have recently been publicized, are about the polio vaccination. Perhaps there are others about other vaccinations of those days, but we now have so many more. Is it correct to endanger even a small percentage of children in order to possibly help the majority? And is it correct to say that this is what the Rebbe wants? I've tried to keep this short, and I'm including some links in the PS if you need further information. Thanks in advance for addressing this question, and thanks for your amazing ongoing broadcasts. And then a few links. Look, we know these arguments, and the Rebbe's approach to polio can be applied to other vaccines as well, absolutely. He wasn't just talking about one vaccine. I mentioned other letters where he generally refers to vaccinations in general. And it could be applied. But it's case by case. If a child is particularly sensitive or allergic, obviously you have to address that. But to come away with a conclusion that we should eliminate all vaccinations when so many doctors are recommending it and has prevented many, many diseases and maybe even eradicated some, I would not have the gall to be able to say that. If you're writing as a doctor, you're writing as a rabbi, or you're writing you did layman's research. So take this research to a doctor, to several doctors. Be objective. Don't just look for those that will agree with you. Take it to Rabbanim and deal with it. That's how I would approach it, and take the Rebbe's letters into account of what he says in general about vaccinations. So it's not about some type of mitzvah vaccination. It's like a new mitzvah of our generation. But it's also not an aveda. And I think everything in moderation and balance. Since there's some more questions, you know what? I'll save them because of time limitations. Let me do a follow-up about parental alienation. This was back in two episodes back, episode 269. Okay. So first of all, there was a beautiful comment, just a thank you. So let me read a thank you from last week's episode. Why not? Thank you for addressing unusual topics, like last week's women's wrestling question. Your answer was excellent. Keep up the great work, Reb Simon. No need to read this on the show, but just wanted to leave a brief message of support. Bracha v'atzlacha. Well, I'm reading it for myself, for others. Why not? Now, as far as parental alienation, so we got two responses. Let me deal with that. One, Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for addressing the topic of parental alienation in segment number 269. I'm an alienated father of 4 daughters over the past 4.5 years. In that time, I've been robbed of several milestones in my daughters' lives, and there's no restitution for those losses. I appreciate your concepts of bittul, objectivity, and neutrality. I believe that those would be tremendously helpful to families in high conflict divorce. I think that the better question is, how does one convince an instigator to have that bittul, and what should be done to an instigator that refuses to be mevatel? Are there cases that can be that can demand for a leader to take a side in a high conflict divorce? And are there lines, for example, alienation, that neither parent should ever cross? What might be reasonable actions to take to pressure an instigator to resolution of a high conflict divorce? Well, I believe I addressed this, and being that there is usually 2 sides to every story, you're calling someone an instigator. I would not come to any conclusions unless I heard the whole entire picture. So if you can get 2 people in the room with a third party, a neutral party, that is a Torah person, that's an intelligent person, that both of you trust, that would be step number 1. Because then you see both sides of the story. Now, even if you're completely right that the other person is a completely evil person and the instigator and you're doing everything right, so a wise person will also look at that and see what can be done when we're dealing with a situation like you're saying. I believe I addressed this, but I just wanted to repeat it since this was written. There was another follow-up on this, but I will leave that again for a later episode. Okay. So let us now do Chassidus question for this week. Chassidus question is sholosh klipos hatmeis. There are a few ways of being mevarer sholosh klipos hatmeis. Sholosh klipos hatmeis, of course, is as the Alter Rebbe explains in Untitled Chapter 7, that sholosh klipos hatmeis is a 6 and 7 it is klipos nega, which is more neutral things that can be used for holiness or can be used for the negative. Sholosh klipos hatmeis are off limits. Osur b'dei chitzenim is the word. Osur means bound by the negative energies. So it's off limits. So he says there are 3 ways of refining. So by a yid holding back from them, refrain, correct. Shav valtasa, or shav v'lei over aveda is kilu asa mitzvah. That's avoiding it. That's a way of refining it, because avoiding it, shvirosan zui takanosa, which means you avoid it, and that way that itself is already elevating them. Number 2, by doing tshuva for them, zdenis nasa kezachias, when someone, God forbid, fell and did transgress, by doing tshuva, like at the end of chapter 7, it can transform the negative into a positive. And 3, by using them in a state of pekuach nefesh. Correct. Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKedesh, by using them pekuach nefesh, when a person, let's say, is, God forbid, must eat on Yom Kippur, even if it's not kosher, pekuach nefesh, so becomes nasa heter or heter gomor even, for that moment, for that person, because it actually helped them. So in some way you've elevated it, even though it's only in that situation, that period of time and so on. It's not a permanent type of heter. The question is, if by inspiring a non-Jew to fulfill the sheva mitzvos, can we be mevarer sholosh klipos hatmeis that he is permitted with? So if you affect a non-Jew who is allowed to eat certain foods that a Jew is sholosh klipos hatmeis for a Jew, are you in some way elevating it? Is that another way? For example, if a non-Jew is influenced to fulfill the 7 laws and eats bacon and uses that nourishment and energy to behave, to serve God according to the sheva mitzvahs, is the holy sparks of the pig or any type of sholosh klipos hatmeis that now the non-Jew benefits from become uplifted? My answer, my initial reaction would be yes, because for that person it's not osir. Whatever the reason, it's not us. Just like, for example, a horse is not kosher to eat, but you're allowed to ride on a horse. So sholosh klipos atmeis doesn't always mean you can't use it in any way. You can have anah from it, even though you're not allowed to eat from it. Avodah zarah, you're not allowed to have not eat and not hana and so on. So you can say, since for him it's allowed, and then he's using the energy, he's eating something that doesn't say anywhere, Shem mitzvah, you're not allowed to eat certain foods for a non-Jew, non-kosher foods. We're not talking about Ever min achai. That is explicit, one of the 7 laws that you're not allowed to do. So why not say that if he's using it for good things, he's elevating it? Is it the same way of elevating for a Jew? That may not be the case, but why not elevate it? You can go even further. The Alter Rebbe says in the end of chapter 1 that going come from sholosh klipos atmeis, and he explains that Abhil explains that's not Chassidu Meselam. So when a person becomes a Chassidu Meselam, you can say the sholosh klipos atmeis that it was originated has now been transformed to klipos nega, and he's elevated that concept of doing things only legarmaya for himself. Chesed lumim chatos has now been elevated to do something for the world, for others, which is essentially the kindness, chesed and yeshur of the 7 Noahide laws. That's how I would answer that. Yes, that is a way of elevating it as well, even though I've not seen it explicitly, but it seems to me that correct to say that, especially being that the non-Jew is created in the divine image, so he has that capacity in the areas that his work is in elevating and refining the world. Okay. Let us now go to 3 essays. Every week we do 3 new essays of this last year's contest, and this is in order of their marks. So we're now in the top 40, basically. So 3 essays. The first one is The Benefits of Uncertainty. Dov Klein, age 70, Manchester, England. Works at the Y. Waldman Principal of Chinuch Na'arim School. I think this age is quite rare. Most of the age is usually much, much younger, but nice to hear. So the benefits of uncertainty. He writes, this essay will examine the different types of counsel offered to people grappling with anxiety provoked by an uncertain future. It will first explore and evaluate the approach of modern psychotherapy, next the traditional Jewish viewpoint, and finally the Chabad Chassidic angle, showing how they can be all incorporated into one unified picture. It will investigate the Chassidic concept of think good and it will be good, and its novel contribution to Jewish thought. And goes on to do just that, the modern approach, the Jewish view, and then the Chabad Chassidic angle. Very well done, very well organized and structured. Thank you. Next essay. How does one break out of it's all or nothing attitude? Gishy Weinfeld, age 33, Ontario, Canada. Okay. Breakfast with little kids can go sometimes like this. I don't see the cornflakes. Sorry, looks like we ran out of it. No cornflakes? Well, then how will I eat breakfast? You can have oatmeal or Cheerios. No, I can only have cornflakes. I can't eat anything else. I guess I will starve this morning. Though this sounds like typically young kid talk, adults can also suffer from its all or nothing attitude as it plays out in various forms in our lives. And goes on to explain how that plays itself out, how Chassidus provides an answer not to have this all or nothing attitude, which many of us get caught up in. It's a short and sweet essay, but nice, very creative, very interesting, and of course very relevant. And finally, the third essay this week, A More Perfect Union, Chana Peterson, age 25, Givat, Shmuel, Israel. Her job is the Click company designer. The preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America sets out the vision for a fledgling country, a country founded on the ideals of justice, peace, liberty, and most of all, a more perfect union. But what does that mean? For a country founded on such a strong belief in unity, it seems that the U.S. has drifted further and further from more perfect with every passing year. What once united us now divides us. And the strains of conflict that poison our national discourse seem to seep over ever deeper into the bedrock of our communities, our families, our homes. So what are we to do about it? For the past 3 years, I have been studying psychology, sociology, and criminology at Bar-Ilan University. In the course of my studies, I have found that though their approaches differ, each of these schools of thought occupy themselves with the same thing, understanding conflict. In this essay, I'm going to look at it through the lens of Chassidus and will endeavor to shine light on the Torah's deeper paradigm of conflict resolution. It will cover how we can attain that goal of a more perfect union in our own lives. And goes on to speak conflict and organizational approach, the Torah approach, hinim ateva manoim. What happens when we avoid conflict? The Tower of Babel. Korach's rebellion. So about case studies. Rabbi Akiva's students, their conflict without empathy. And then finally, nothing but God, a deeper look at conflict. Well, again, very comprehensive essay, good topic, well-rounded, and thank you for that. All these essays are posted as we speak at chassidusapply.com, and you can also receive them when you subscribe to our weekly emails. We send out all the essays as they're posted. In general, when you subscribe to My Life Chassidus Applied on YouTube, you get notifications of every program, including new things that are posted outside even of the series of My Life, Farbrengens and different discussions and different talks and lectures. So with that, we conclude episode 271 of My Life Chassidus Applied in this period in time, the 9 days, where the Rebbe says we should be making siyumim each night, each day. Siyumim add in simcha, in a halachic way, that we add joy in these days, and everything possible to add joy and unity and avos Yisrael to counteract the negative forces that will ultimately have Yehovcha Yom HaMeil L'Sosno Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, that even before Tisha B'Av, the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. We're here every Sunday, and we'll be here next Sunday as well at the conclusion of Tisha B'Av, Nidche. Every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. My Life Chassidus Applied. Thank you so much.